Hello and welcome to 3Spoonies. We're your hosts, Karen, Jo and Claire. This is episode number 59 and we're discussing PTSD. While we won't be discussing anyone's situations in depth, we are aware that this could be a heavy topic for some. So anything that is named, we will put into the show notes. So have a quick look if that could be of concern to you. Otherwise, let's dive in.
If money advice has ever made someone feel lazy, chaotic, or like they've somehow failed at adulthood, Maddie Alexander Grout wants people to know they are definitely not alone. Maddie is a visibility coach for hidden disability entrepreneurs, ADHD advocate, speaker and best-selling author, and she wrote Mad About Money because she was tired of seeing neurodivergent people judged for struggling with money. This isn't a finance book full of complicated jargon and unrealistic routines. It's honest, relatable, and designed for people whose brains don't work in neat little spreadsheets. Inside, Maddie talks openly about ADHD, impulse spending, debt, overwhelm, burnout, dopamine chasing, and creating systems that work in real life, not just on paper. The book combines practical money support with personal stories, humour and reassurance for anyone who has ever felt bad with money. Mad About Money is available now.
Hello, I'm Karen from Pony.
Jo from Breakout Business Solutions.
And I'm Claire from Black Bell Stationery.
And together we are 3Spoonies, navigating our way through life and business with not enough spoons. So today we're talking about PTSD, so we wanted to get an expert in rather than just talking twaddle, because that wouldn't be very valuable to anyone. So we are joined by Christine Spencer. Hello.
Oh, hi everyone.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be part of these sessions. My name is Christine Spencer. I run a small business called Mental Strength and Wellbeing, which does focus on the wellbeing space, covering mental health, suicide, and all of those topics that fit under those headings around depression, anxiety, PTSD. But I also deliver training on neurodiversity. So I help people to understand the topic of wellbeing, what it means to them. I can offer training that will educate people. I offer coaching that will help people to navigate and find the solutions to their issues. And I can also offer sort of therapy that looks at someone's trauma that they may well have experienced that has led to PTSD, that is sort of capturing that anxiety, that depression. One of the other things that I do focus on quite a lot is women's mental health and well-being. But I know today we're not going to distinguish between men and women, and the subject of PTSD can affect any one of us out there. So thank you very much for having me along.
And Hal, thank you for being here and thank you for all you do, because it's so necessary. I'm just going to pass over to Jo for some questions. Whoosh!
Okay, thank you again, Christine, for joining us. Just as a start out, can you explain what PTSD is for those people who maybe don't know or have possibly got the wrong impression?
Yeah, so PTSD is sort of something that can happen, and someone can be diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder, although some people don't like to add the disorder on to the end of it. So some people might just say PTS, post-traumatic stress. And it is as a result of something that someone has experienced that has been traumatic for them. But PTSD doesn't always come from that first-hand experience of trauma. It can come from somebody sort of having shared their trauma with that individual, and the more trauma maybe that somebody else shares with us individually can lead to actually that individual maybe experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as we shorten it. So it's quite an interesting subject, that it can come from what you experience, but it can also come from people sharing their own experiences with you as an individual, which could result in sort of PTSD developing. And sometimes we do class that as vicarious trauma. It's, not my own trauma, it's everybody else's trauma. Builds up, builds up, builds up, and then suddenly becomes my own.
I was going to ask, it's like, is it someone like you and a therapist, do they have sort of a lot of issues with taking on all that trauma?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Joe. As a trauma therapist myself, I'm listening to people talking about trauma, even when I'm delivering a course on mental health first aid, or delivering a course on suicide first aid, or any other subject relatable to that. People can start to share their experiences if they feel comfortable with it. And, in that space, we have to learn to navigate our way through that. And for me, if people do share that with me, then I have ways of dealing with that. Have there's a lot of well-being that I practice. I go for a walk, or I read, or I just sit quietly, sort of understanding what somebody else has shared, and keep telling myself it's not my trauma. Now, that is easier said than done.
Yes, I can imagine it is.
But then the art of practicing self-care is really, really important for someone like myself who works in the field of mental health and well-being plus trauma. We have to have our own system to sort of navigate the trauma that somebody else is sharing with us, to be able to park it and understand that it's not my trauma. But it can be difficult, especially if you work in the care sector.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So yeah, it's like you've got support for dealing with other people's trauma and all
Yes.
everything that encompasses
Yeah.
within your work. That sounds like healthy boundaries and deep coping mechanisms to me.
Most definitely healthy boundaries. And one of the things that, I do sign up to is having those supervision meetings where I can talk to sort of another therapist, who is supervisor in the field of therapy, can help me if I'm struggling to make it a rational, logical sort of experience, and be able to say, yeah, okay, not my experience. What do I need to do more of? What do I need to do less of? So yeah, there is so much to consider.
Yeah. Ladies, do you have any questions about that before I move on to my next one?
Not so much a question. It's going to be sort of one of those annoying, rambling things that eventually turns into a question.
Go for it.
Something I've experienced is a lot of people with PTSD will sort of minimise what's happened, and what happened to you was awful, what happened to me wasn't that bad, or well, I only witnessed something, or I think it's very easy to go, oh well, what am I making a fuss about? And I think that can be quite damaging. So is there something that you can suggest to help people if they're in that situation, when they're going, oh well, am I worthy of being as upset as I am?
Yeah, another great question, because there are a lot of people out there that try and manage what they've experienced by just, going about their day-to-day activities. And when we think about trauma that can lead to PTSD, trauma is different for you. It's different for me. Some trauma, some people will say, oh, for goodness sake, that's nothing to worry about. That's not as bad as somebody else's trauma. So what we do have to acknowledge that each and every one of us will experience things differently, even if we share exactly the same situation at the same time. Our experience of it will be something different. We will deal with it differently. I would encourage sort of everyone to recognize that what they have experienced is unique to them. And if they begin to struggle on a day-to-day basis, don't hang on to it. Reach out to someone, a professional, who can support you to get the right help and support. that will help you navigate what you have experienced and to be able to put it into a space whereby we recognize it's happened, we can acknowledge that it's there, but we also accept that it was in the past. And really reaching out for that professional is very important if we are to carry on a day-to-day basis where that trauma doesn't impact us. So regardless of whether it's our personal trauma or whether we have gathered trauma from other areas, other people, if it's impacting your relationships, your work, your social life, then I would encourage people to think about their self-care, but also who can help them to overcome what it is that they've experienced, what it is. Never be afraid to talk about it. Never be afraid to reach out for that help. There is a lot of help out there. In organisations, you've got the employee assistance programs, occupational health. You know, outside, you've got your GP as the first port of call. Of course, you've got private therapy. So like myself, there's lots of other therapists out there that can help people to understand that experience.
Fantastic. Does PTSD manifest itself in sort of typical ways, or is everybody different?
Everybody is different, Joe. I mean, a couple of the things that do show through, if someone's experiencing PTSD, they might show signs of anxiety, for instance. They might show signs of being depressed. They might have minor flashbacks, or they could have quite catastrophic flashbacks. An individual, you could be talking to them, they're having a lovely conversation with you and you're enjoying that conversation. You might just use one word, or there might be a gesture that you do, or you might look in a certain way, and it will trigger them. It'll trigger the memory, and it'll put them straight back into sort of that space. So there are a lot of different things that we can see and understand and hear in a person who might be experiencing PTSD. However, it's very, very important not to look at someone and say, I think you're experiencing PTSD. Only a professional can sort of say, based on what you've experienced, and, you know, you will be given a form to complete on how you have felt over maybe the last couple of weeks or the last 4 weeks. And then that will be repeated to see how you're going through any therapeutic intervention. Like all mental health, we shouldn't sort of stick a label quickly on someone. But if it's a behaviour or an outburst that you haven't seen it in that person, or it's not sort of normal for that person to behave like that, then let's sit down and talk to someone and understand how we can support them and where would we encourage them to get that help and support. They might already be getting help and support. So let's think about encouraging them to touch base, get in touch with that professional again, just in case there's anything more serious that's going on, or in case something else has happened since that initial traumatic experience or event.
Yeah, that was going to be, well, kind of is my next question. If you know someone and they're acting different to they normally do, you're worried about them, or if they're having an outburst, what is the best way to approach it? Is there a best way?
Firstly, as you've sort of just highlighted there, and I mentioned before, in the workplace and our social life, we get to know people around us. In the workplace, one of the key things I can say to everyone is get to know the people that you work with, that you work closely with on a day-to-day basis. Get to know what is their norm for how they interact with people, how they go about their day-to-day work activities. In our social lives, our family, our friends, again, get to know what's normal for them so that we can spot those signs. We can see what is different. And then, yeah, so long as it's safe for you and it is safe for the other person, then start that conversation. And we've got to start that conversation to keep that conversation going Otherwise, what's the point of even spotting the signs?
Yeah.
So have that conversation about what I've noticed is I'm concerned about, because this is not like you are normally. So I am a bit concerned. Something's changed. Can we talk about it? But tell the person what you're concerned about, not just, oh, I'm concerned about that behaviour. What behaviour? So let's just say that we see that outburst. I've noticed that recently you've been a bit anxious, more anxious than normal. And I've noticed that you've been having a few arguments with people. I'm a bit concerned because this isn't like you. And we're not going to go in and say, you've got anxiety, or, that must be.
Yeah.
We have to focus on what we've seen and what we're hearing to be able to share our concern for that individual. If not, we are being the person that is saying this is what's happening, rather than getting the person to explain how they're feeling. So again, one of the questions that I would ask is, how are they feeling? And I've noticed that you've not been your normal self. I've been a bit concerned because I noticed the other day that you're having an argument with someone that's not like you. How have you been feeling? How are you feeling?
And I would say, from a mental health perspective, those people you know well enough, ask them how they're doing. And don't take everything's fine. No, really, how are you doing? So long as you know them well enough.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. If someone sort of, you are concerned about them, how are they feeling? Oh, I'm feeling absolutely fine. Thank you for asking. Really? Or even, I've noticed. Yeah.
Yeah. Me and my mother had a conversation at one point of, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. And then she paused a moment of, but neither of us are fine, are we? But we will be. Yeah, exactly.
It's an interesting concept, but it's like, get that conversation started. Don't pressurize the person too much, because if you pressurize the person, you're going to end up shutting them down. So how many times do we say, really? Really?
Once.
Okay, well, I am concerned. What can I do to support you?
Yeah. It's making it clear it's not a standard greeting. It's a genuine,
Yes.
how are you?
Yeah. So if we sort of go back to that, how are you feeling? Yeah, I'm fine. How are you feeling really? Yeah, no, I'm feeling good, thank you. Just explain to me what good means, because I've noticed a few things that have concerned me. So just explain what that good looks like and feels like. But if the person doesn't want to talk, never ever push them into that corner of, you've got to tell me, because today might not be the right day for them. Even if you've got concerns for their safety, because one thing we do know with someone who's experiencing PTSD is that if they're not getting the right level of professional support, intervention, it could lead to thoughts of suicide. And that's probably what you're showing concerns for, around that change in behaviour. But again, we're not going to go in and say, I'm a bit concerned that you're displaying suicide behaviours, but I am concerned because you're not normally showing behaviours such as this, and add those behaviours in.
Fabulous. Ladies, do you have any questions before we take a quick break?
Just a quick one, because we're all a bit neurospicy. Can there be added complications? So I know some people say, oh, well, people on the spectrum don't have empathy. And it's like, is it that they don't have empathy, or that it's just expressed differently? So can there be added levels of complication if someone is wired up slightly differently to you?
Don't believe so, from the training that I've had in mental health, suicide, PTSD, therapy, neurodiversity. Neurodiverse individuals think and feel differently, but we certainly should not treat you differently. What we should do is understand that we are all unique, and that we may see the world differently around us. It's not about accepting that just because we see that world differently, that those behaviours are going to be any different. But if we understand those behaviours of a neurodiverse individual, again, we'll understand what is unique and normal for them. And if that changes, then let's have that conversation. And, you know, a lot of people think, oh, you know, we've got to start talking about neurodiversity. Oh, and what if sort of PTSD comes into it? Let's focus on understanding the individual to understand how we can best support them. But those questions would be the same. I am concerned. What I've noticed is, what I hear is, and what I'm seeing is not how you normally go about your work or your social life. So how are you feeling? How are you truly feeling? Now, there's a lot spoken about individuals who are neurodiverse, but sometimes, you know, we can have sort of poor behaviors coming out of someone who's neurodiverse, thinking that it's an excuse. But what we know is that the majority of individuals who are neurodiverse do think, feel, and act differently. Neurodiversity is not an excuse for bad behavior, but then ignoring a neurodiverse individual, if they are experiencing turmoil, it's not an excuse to ignore them. Has that answered your question, Karen?
Yes, it has. Thank you very much. But we're just going to take a brief pause for Spoonsful of Loveliness. This is lots of lovely things from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Liz Drury, and you probably recognise my voice, as I'm the voiceover artist behind the 3Spoonies podcast adverts. If you're curious about the other services I offer, pop over to my website, lizdrury.com, where you can find out how I could help you with things like voiceover for videos, narration for online courses, announcements for events, voicemail greetings and on-hold messages, audio tools for museums, and more. That's lizdrury.com.
So welcome back to our episode on PTSD. We are still joined by the lovely Christine Spencer, who is making us all think real hard, but in a good way. So in sort of your experience with sort of individuals with PTSD, do they tend to recognise that they need help themselves, or is it usually someone's recognised it in them? What is there a typical sort of process, I'd say?
Great question. Now, having sort of experienced in the training room on occasions participants who have been diagnosed with PTSD and then something has happened which has triggered their PTSD, I'm sort of the ilk that should we, and I think I'm probably going a little bit off track here, but I'm going as my mind is thinking, that if you've got an individual who you work with or that you know that is experiencing PTSD, then allow them to sort of experience it, but know how to have a conversation with them. And I know I've gone off on a tangent there. So, Jo, when you're ready, just refresh my memory of that question again.
We love a tangent here, it's fine.
So,
Yeah, Neurospicy, we go off in so many. But no, it's all linked. My question was, is there a process of somebody sort of coming to get help, or is it usually their choice, or, you know, something that someone else has pointed out to them?
Now, a lot of people with PTSD do recognise, especially armed forces, they will identify probably more than maybe an individual that we know hasn't been in the armed forces. They potentially would recognise it sooner than someone who's not in the armed forces. But what we do understand is that PTSD is probably more common than we think, because yes, years ago, it was only attributed to those individuals who work in the armed forces, rather than any one of us could experience PTSD from, let's just say, having an accident in the car, where it might be a minor accident or it could be sort of a major accident. But, people can experience PTSD from, let's think about sort of the care sector. Someone goes in for an operation. PTSD can come from sort of the medical sort of experience that they've had. So some people will recognize it easier than others.
Yeah.
I am a firm believer that if we are all aware of how people normally interact on a day-to-day basis, how they normally work on a day-to-day basis, then we can acknowledge when things change. And some people will probably get to that stage of having a crisis in PTSD whereby they could be diagnosed very, very quickly without them even realize it. So the level of PTSD or the trauma that someone has experienced, for me, probably says that some people will try and deal with it. Others will sort of be here and suddenly realize that they're at crisis level, but it will be taken out of their control. Whereas the people over here are gradually maybe adding to their own trauma, and then somebody interacts with them saying, I've noticed that. So, a lot of people might be going around holding in sort of those experiences of PTSD. I mean, PTSD can come from having experienced domestic abuse. PTSD can come from being a victim and then being victim shamed,
Yeah.
which is a really key thing currently. People can experience PTSD through pregnancy and childbirth. People can experience, as I mentioned, they can experience PTSD having had a car accident, a fall. When we think about global events at the moment, people can experience PTSD from losing their home to a war situation, bereavement, financial worries, because it can build and build and build. PTSD can come from absolutely anything, come from any situation, until maybe we can recognize a change in that person. We can get them to speak to the professionals. Some people might try sort of therapy as a way of talking, or coaching for wellbeing as a way of talking about their feelings. And then we can identify that maybe PTSD is going on and encourage them to get professional help, or they could go and get that professional help and be encouraged to undertake therapy.
Yeah, that all makes sense. My brain did go off on a little tangent there on its own. So I have a random question. What's the difference between PTSD and CPTSD?
Okay, so the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD is the longevity. So all of us, anyone can experience PTSD. We can also experience acute stress disorder where, we can have those signs and symptoms of PTSD, but with acute stress disorder, we can get past it maybe within 4 to 6 weeks, whereas PTSD will go on a lot longer. Complex PTSD, someone will have experienced the ups and downs, the sort of way that they go about their social life, their work life, etc., potentially for longer than 6 months. So for someone to be diagnosed with complex PTSD, they'll have experienced their trauma, their sort of feelings, the anxiety, the depression, the triggers, the outbursts. It'll be more severe than PTSD, but it's more complex because it's gone on for a lot longer, and it severely sort of impacts someone on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that, because there was just a little bit in my brain going, oh, I want to know this. So, ladies, do you have any other questions?
Yes, this might be a bit of a controversial one, possibly, but where do you stand on peer support groups, either alongside therapy or maybe as a bridge to therapy, or if someone's waiting for therapy, can they be beneficial?
two schools of thought here, and I think it comes down to an individual choice. Now, a lot of individuals that I've met, that I work with, don't want to go to a peer support group and share what they've experienced with a lot of people that they don't necessarily know. And even if they've been to that peer support group for a few weeks, they don't feel comfortable sharing it. And a very personal perspective around peer support groups is, unless the person running it has sort of the right skill set, the right qualification, then it could increase the trauma that that person is experiencing. And through sort of a GP route of getting trauma therapy, it can be quite a lengthy process. Whereas if someone does reach out to a private practitioner like myself, then it can be a lot sooner for them to get that help and support. Yes, they are going to pay for that support, but they're going to get that help sooner rather than later. So if someone is happy going to a group situation and talking to people that they don't really know, absolutely fine. But just be aware that you're going to share stuff with people that don't know you, and you don't know what their response to your trauma is going to be. But if you have that one-on-one, you have certainly got someone who isn't judgmental, is empathic, is compassionate, and is there to listen to you, to be able to support you in the right way.
Claire, you don't have any questions?
Yeah. It's a hard one for me because I've tried the peer support groups. I don't do well with them, but I've found someone that I can talk to very well who has been really supportive. I know I need to get and speak to someone professionally still, but it's years of work. But yeah, when you were talking about kind of recognizing behaviors, I know for myself, and I've learned over the years, when I'm kind of spiraling more is what I call it. I've started noticing the behaviors in me, or when I'm doing certain things, and now I can sit there and look at it and be like, okay, why am I doing that? What's kind of triggered me in a way to make me have that response to behave like this?
Yes.
So yeah, it's a hard one. I don't really have a question because I'm kind of going through it all myself and with my husband at the moment. So
Well, thank you for sharing that, Claire, because you've just highlighted something that I think is a key attribute of anyone going through trauma that they've experienced, and that is self-awareness. The awareness that it is impacting you, and having that awareness that reaching out for that help and support is only going to be a good thing. And you've just acknowledged that, that group peer support isn't something that you would go for. I've experienced trauma myself in the past. I've had that victim shaming. So I know exactly how that feels.
it makes you feel hard for you to kind of reach out and want to put yourself
Yeah,
out there in a way, doesn't it?
it does. But that self-awareness of, well, what can I do when my little triggers come up? And I sort of laugh about it, because if something triggers me, it's almost like my little heart goes boom. But then I have had my heart tested, so I know what's wrong with it. Because a person said to me, "Well, oh, is that not that you maybe got a heart condition?" Yes, sometimes my heart does go boom, but I've identified that it does go boom. But then I get this rush of heat that says something's triggered me, and then I have to say to myself, pause, you're not welcome here at the moment. So I recognize that I have been triggered, and it could be a person, it could be a word, it could be a situation, it could be a phrase, it could be anything. It could be what I see or what I hear. But yeah, I tell myself to pause. But then after, and this is really important for me when I'm working with people with their trauma, but also training people to think about, well, what does mental health, what does suicide first aid mean to them, and all those subjects, to say, I can't deal with this at the moment. I've got to pause it. But then at the end of sort of whatever I'm doing, I then think, right, okay, that touched me. I've got to park it. I've got to offload it. So what can I do? And it depends on the level of severity as to
Mm.
how it's touched me. And it might not just be my own trauma that's been reignited. It might be that I feel I've started to take on somebody else's trauma because I can feel it. And
Yeah.
I might sort of go for a walk. I might do some baking. I might go out and do a bit of weeding in the garden. Or I might just sit and look at the world around me outside and whilst drinking a cup of tea. Sometimes it only takes 5 minutes to say, that's not mine to deal with, but I've acknowledged it with the other person because I'm working with them. So for everyone, if everyone can do it, to acknowledge that something's different, that something's not working, that I keep getting myself into this cycle of triggers. How can I break that cycle, which is where therapy does come in, to help you break that cycle and to help you think about what you can do to minimize what you're experiencing. So thank you for sharing that, because that really is important, Claire.
That's okay. It's taken me a long time to get to this stage.
Yeah.
Many years of going around in circles and trying different things. And ironically, the one thing that I always was like, I can't do it, I'm never going to do it. And I found is kind of a bit of my savior at the moment is journaling.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to write. And it's like, you just write and write and write. And then it's when I read it back afterwards, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, then that's when like, it's just, and then I can dig deeper into why I'm feeling certain ways about things. And
Yeah.
it kind of taps into what your head isn't ready to kind of tell you, like acknowledge. But as you're writing it, it just comes out anyway.
Yeah. And journaling is really good, but not everyone enjoys journaling.
No, and I thought I'd be that person because I don't generally enjoy writing, to be fair. And I've never had a diary as a kid or anything like that. So to me, it was like, why would you write down how you feel? What are you going to put? Oh, today I done this, and
Yeah.
I was really skeptical. But the person whose journal I got, she actually done a course, and it's all about like how are you feeling? Why are you feeling certain
Yes.
ways? Looking into all the things that you've achieved in life, and that was a really hard one for me because I was like, well, I haven't really. And she's like, but you've done, and she just come out with all these, don't give me that look, Karen, I know. She was like, but you're a mum, you've raised your son, you work independently, you've done even like the small things of like, you learn as a kid, learning to read, to tie your shoes. She's like, you can break it down into such smaller steps. And I was just like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. And it is quite incredible, like when you start to look at things in a different way, how it can kind of change our outlook a bit as well.
Yeah. And something else that you just picked up on there, I often get, well, where does PTSD come from? And as I've already mentioned, a lot of it can come from what we experience on a day-to-day basis, just by watching what's on the TV or experiencing it ourselves. But then a lot of our trauma can be reignited later in life from what we've experienced at a very young age.
Yeah.
Those adverse childhood experiences, which sometimes we don't recognize at the time, but then something happens in adolescence or adulthood, and suddenly we're out there with our emotions and we're showing signs of sort of the PTSD and anxiety, depression, stress, outbursts, triggers, all of that. And it can be quite frightening for that individual if they don't truly sort of understand and appreciate sort of what has happened to them. But then if we can get people to understand, this is their normal. This is their normal in how they're dealing with that situation because they don't know anything different. So by sort of helping someone to understand that they could be experiencing PTSD or they have been diagnosed with PTSD, what can we do to help and support? How can I help people to break it down so that they can put it into, I class it, manageable size chunks to then be able to store it as a past event rather than something that they're going to experience day in, day out, minute by minute, month by month, year by year. So there is a lot to consider. It's a very, very complex topic.
It really is, yeah.
Thank you, Claire, for opening up and sharing there. I knew you were uncomfortable, but I knew if I give you that little part, you would. And I think that will probably help you and everybody listening. So thank you both for that. I'm going to pass over to Karen to wrap us up on that note.
Well, thank you, Christine, for being here. Thank you for your answers. I think you've given a great deal of insight, and there's certainly some things that you've said that I can put into practice. So I'm sure that'll be the same for other people as well. Is there anything you'd like to let us know about or plug, or anything exciting you're doing that we can get involved with?
So I did mention at the beginning that I love talking about women's mental health. So each and every year, I do run a women's mental health and wellbeing festival. Too late for this year because this year's was in June. But for those of you that might be interested in sort of learning more about women's mental health and coming along and finding like-minded women who might have experienced sort of poor mental health, not being able to talk to anyone, it's an empowering, inspirational day where we have lots of fantastic speakers coming along, sharing their personal lived experiences so that people can understand that they're not alone, that they can learn from others and go away feeling energized, inspired, and, as I say, empowered. So our next event is likely to be in July next year. So please feel free to get in touch with me at christinespencer.cs@gmail.com or have a look on the website. It's www.mentalstrengthandwellbeing.com. But of course, anyone can contact me for any training, coaching, therapy interventions. I can help you set up sort of well-being in the workplace. What is best for you? It's not all about education, but it is about implementation. It's about thinking about how we can create that culture. So please do get in touch for anything around the subject of mental health, suicide, neurodiversity, well-being as a whole.
Thank you very much. And thank you to you for joining us for 3Spoonies on PTSD. We'd love to know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for our weekly podcast. You can also buy us a Banoffee coffee if you like what we do. Links, as ever, will be in the show notes. We'll see you next week for community questions. Have a great day and keep track of your spoons.